started, just to introduce myself, my name's Carl Rogerson. I'm the director at Ability Research School. Welcome to tonight's session, the second in our series of 3 webinars focusing on evidence-based practice in the early years. There's a few familiar names I see you've joined us, and lots of new colleagues too, so welcome. You're all very well behaved too. You have your microphones off and your cameras off, so thank you for that. We are recording tonight's session, so that will be shared afterwards, and we've had some positive feedback about that where colleagues have used it as a stimulus when working back in school, so that's great. It's used as a resource. So moving on, I'd like to introduce and welcome our evidence lead in education, Victoria Day, who is presenting tonight's session for us. She brings a wealth of experience to share with us tonight. Firstly as a teacher, obviously, but in a range of other roles as an assistant head teacher and lead facilitator for early years at Riders Hay Teaching School in Walsall, an early literacy lecturer at Birmingham City University, and as a SLE working across schools in the Black Country to raise outcomes for pupils. So she's going to share all of that knowledge with us tonight in the context of early literacy. So Victoria, I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you very much for tonight.
Thank you, Carl. It's a pleasure to deliver this afternoon's webinar to you, our second session entitled A Research-Based Approach to Living High Quality Literacy. Okay, so our journey this afternoon, during this webinar, we will delve deeper into the Preparing for Literacy Guidance Report along with other theory and research, to gain a deeper understanding together of how children learn language and literacy and how to best support their learning through this research-based approach. During this webinar, I will draw on examples of the approaches that we have implemented here at Riders Hayes across our 2 to 5 year old early years provision. Okay, so together we'll tune into our children first and foremost, and ourselves, act on the research and consider the research based on approaches to improve the effectiveness of early literacy. Okay, so in recommendation 1 of the EEF guidance, we are reminded of the fundamental role that early years adults play and how through their deliberately high quality interactions that we can develop young children's communication language. So, for example, during their daily routine, we want to ensure that each component of their day, whether it be phonics or in reception or story time, child-initiated or adult-led, that we are talking with children and not to them, because we understand that these interactions are what children need, lots of conversational turns, back and forth interactions. As it says here about the critical role that adults play, and that's what I'm going to really focus on. Without us, I always say that yes, the environment is absolutely amazing, needs to be the best it can be, but it's adults that really need to be the best they can be so that children can thrive. Interactions here at school at Riders Hayes are everything. It's in these moments during our interactions that we assess, plan and teach. And this process starts by adults always being available to the children when they need them, to observe and to listen to the children from the very moment they arrive in our setting. It's because we start with observation. Our interactions are always really respectful, exciting and engaging for the children. Interactions always take into account the children's background, their starting point, needs and interests. Interactions ultimately we see as our teaching here. And the 2019 School Inspection Handbook states clearly that teaching early years covers the very varied ways in which practitioners ourselves support children to learn. So if we're narrating, communicating, modelling language, showing, explaining, demonstrating, exploring ideas, the list's endless, we're teaching. It's our intentional interactions we are teaching, and being really mindful and tuning into our practice to just see how effective we are in these strategies. So in recommendation 1, it talks about sustained shared thinking. It states that guided interaction occurs with when an adult and child collaborate on a task and the adult strategies are highly tuned into the children's capabilities and motivations. We're responsive to the children's intentions, focus on the spontaneity of the learning, and provide that feedback, that authentic feedback. Discussion is a key feature of this approach, and we use a variety of questions to keep the back and forth interaction going and extend, most importantly, children's thinking. So we're talking about sustained shared thinking. So it involves 2 or more people working together to solve a problem, to clarify an issue, evaluate an activity, or extend a narrative. Key features of a sustained shared thinking interaction is that we're all attuned together, and ultimately we want to think about developing children's thinking. And tonight we're thinking about literacy. We want to develop children's communication and literacy outcomes. So back and forth interactions in an earlier setting increase children's capacity to think out loud and share their knowledge and understanding. Sustained shared thinking provides a framework for early years practitioners to motivate their children in their learning. Firstly, adults encourage a child's idea, then adults model those metacognitive processes out loud, that plan, do, review of how to approach an idea, which allows the children then to develop their own thinking and move forward and flourish and thrive in their development. Okay. Dylan William here, as his quote, I'm sure we've seen it back in 2016, every practitioner needs to improve, not because they're not good enough, but because they can be even better. It's that growth mindset approach that we all have here as in our super team here of early years practitioners. And what we really want to do, and we do as practitioners, is really tune into what we do. And we think about stopping good things to make way for even better things. And the challenge is to really understand what works in our practice, what works in our interactions, what strategies really make a difference, and for which children. So tonight we're going to tune in. I've got lots of research where to show you and demonstrate to you how we tune into our practice and make these changes to drive outcomes for our children, because we're continuously refining and adapting our planning and practice in response to the observations we make. We tune into ourselves, acting on research-based approaches to improve the effectiveness of our practice in early language and literacy, to ensure that the children's needs are met, and that we are always thinking and are aware and have a detailed understanding of children's next steps. In partnership with the University of Oxford, during our Language First DFE project, we implemented a number of communication and language strategies and audits that provided not just us here at Riders Hayes, but the 62 schools that we work with and continue to work with across the region, providing a forensic lens to really tune into our practice, into our interactions, and how effective they are in language learning. So I'll share a few with you now. So here is a conversational toolkit we've put together in partnership with the University of Oxford to provide a consistent approach for all adults in their interactions, and a useful tool also for leaders in monitoring and observation, but consistency is key. Here outlined in this toolkit are all of those conventions, all of those strategies that we want to see all of our adults using. So it doesn't matter which adult child works with, they're going to get that dose and diet they need of adults talking about past and future events, telling and retelling, and extending children's thinking. Using questions, those completion prompts, those WH questions, the what, the where, the why, the when. So this has been a really valuable prompt. It's the best will in the world that we're really, you know, work with lots of skilled practitioners, but there's sometimes that we just need that prompt to remind us of some of those intentional strategies we can use in our interactions to keep those interactions going back and forth and continuing to develop thinking. We're really tuned in as a school to really think about those irresistible contexts for talk and what types of things our children are bursting to talk about. We know from our research and our knowledge and experience that children are most confident and motivated to talk about things that they have experience of, where they feel the expert, they can talk at length about, things that they're interested in, things that have meaning to them. So we build on these as a team, and in order to provide rich and varied resources and experiences for our children year on year, term on term across our early years curriculum. We squeeze the juice out of, makes the most of every play, opportunity and exploration and investigation. And we offer repeated opportunities for children to bump into and use new language and have opportunities to apply this language in meaningful context, develop their literacy. Those are a few of those strategies, combining a comment and a question, inviting children to ask questions themselves. We are always looking, listening, noticing the strategies that we're using. So to tune in and actually say, which of these strategies do I use most often? Which of these strategies are most effective with some particular children, my reluctant children, perhaps my pupil premium children, my children that thinking about COVID and children returning? Which of these strategies do I really need to use with some of these children that haven't been at school for a while? So really tuning into self to really maximise those opportunities that we have in our interactions to drive forward skills, knowledge and language and literacy. So tuning in, a second, tuning further, a second audit that we developed with the University of Oxford was a deep reflection into the language we are using with the children, that we plan for and intentionally infuse with the children. So observation followed to notice if children then, of course, were using the language themselves, is that we might infuse it with the children and give them that language, but actually, are they using it themselves? So we want to really tune in to thinking, are we using those nouns and pronouns with the children? How about those action words, those verbs, those adjectives and adverbs, those prepositions and unusual words? And we incorporated this vocabulary as well, refrains of language, into our Wellcome assessments as well. Think about those repetitive words and phrases that you also want to incorporate. Here at Riders Hayes, we're a Nelly Advocate School in the field Early Language Intervention. We also want to think about that key vocabulary that we can ensure that children continue to bump into, but also that we really want to tune into to see if children are using. We always ensure that as well, that we want to, as a staff, have really clear child-friendly definitions of new words, and we're consistent across our setting. So when we're talking about the weather, words like fog and concepts like fog on a foggy day can we all be, are we all consistent and feel confident as practitioners, our teaching assistants, our teachers, and our apprentices, all of us together feeling confident with language. And then we never dumb language down. We want to think carefully about those complex sentences, those grammatical structures, so that we're connecting phrases with the children and using that prepositional language. So again, using these tools to really audit and tune into our practice. So ensuring we're giving the children the dose they need and deserve. And another audit is particularly thinking now that children have returned, and also we use this a lot at the beginning of the year at transition induction, of who are we interacting with? We know research shows it's our sociable, bubbly, effervescent children that often we are ready to come over to us to have a conversation, that we interact. Do we interact with those children the most? How about some of our passive children, our EIL children, our SEND children? Do we interact with those as much, and for how long? So really tuning into your practice and the interactions, thinking about how long those interactions are and the language and the strategies we're using during those interactions. Okay, so I'm going to think a little bit more about those irresistible contexts for language learning and literacy learning. And as the EF says here in the guidance report, is we want to provide children with a rich language environment, those implicit approaches, which in session 1, delivered by the skilled Billsley Early Years team, we talked a lot about those rich language environment approaches. But tonight as well, we're going to think about those direct explicit approaches, the role of the adult that we model, that we guide, that we deliberately and intentionally use with the children to develop their vocabulary, but also literacy. Okay. So children thrive when presented with meaningful and irresistible context for language and literacy learning. In the Handbook of Early Literacy Research, Harris states, when adults build on children's interest but offer information, vocabulary comes alive. And Harris continues in his research and his findings that from a child's perspective, vocabulary learning is not about words in isolation, but about acquiring the concepts in which a word stands. So here we've got 2 of our children exploring the chicks that have hatched in our incubator. So thinking about, from a child's perspective then, that vocabulary isn't just about the learning of words. So for example, we know that when children in our early years point to an object, they don't just want to hear the name of the new object, for example, the incubator here. They want to know, what's that? What children really want is information about what it's for, its function, its intended function, and where it's found. So the children here, if they said, what's that? They want to know it's an egg incubator. It's an incubator. It's an enclosed box with a fan and a heater to keep those eggs warm for 21 days. And then when the chicks have hatched, as they have on there, is that it keeps them warm and allows them to thrive. So again, giving the children as well, which the children have here, of not just hearing it, of having that multi-sensory experience, that hands-on experience to really paint those pictures and develop and build those mental representations of language and conceptual understanding for the children. So we're thinking about semantics is really helping children to develop rich, meaningful representations of words, the depth and breadth. And we're going to look at some of the investigative, exploratory experiences that we provide here, which I'm sure you do too, that present authentic opportunities to develop, for children to develop and use both receptive and expressive language skills. Thinking about exploration and investigation, it's scientific inquiry, those science-based experiences that help children, all children, but particularly children as well with limited language, to participate, to be active and learn English, both language and literacy. So research to support that is French in 2002 in the report Capitalising on Children's Fascinations with the Everyday World to Foster Language and Literacy Development. Here it says that children create strong and enduring mental representations of what they've experienced in investigating the everyday world. They readily acquire vocabulary to describe and share these mental representations and the concepts that evolve them from them. Children then rely on these mental representations as the basis for further learning and for higher order intellectual skills such as problem solving, hypothesis testing and generalising across situations. So again, capitalising on science and those investigative, exploratory, curious, irresistible contexts. There's a few examples here of our investigation stations, our enabling environments, the opportunities that children have, the lens that we have now when we look at water play, for example, of thinking about our curriculum and sequential offer. If children in our preschool, in our 2-year-old provision, are pouring and filling and emptying, then what are we going to then offer in nursery that will challenge the children further. And then moving the children on, thinking about all of the language and the concepts and understanding they can grasp, and we want to take them and challenge them further with water. So thinking about the vocabulary of a vortex and a cyclone, of different ways we can use water and manipulate water to bring this vocabulary to life. Experiments, investigations linked to the gingerbread man story. It's a what if, or why actually? Why did the gingerbread man climb onto the fox's back? Why didn't he swim across? What would have happened if he went in the water? Make those predictions, a reason to talk. Let's find out. It might not have been water. What if it had been oil or vinegar or something fizzy? Or what if it fell into my hot cup of tea? There's lots of reasons for talk, scientific inquiry to build the essence of vocabulary learning. And here's some of our children in nursery enjoying growing seeds in different conditions. So again, thinking about bringing that scientific element in there where they can change those variables, make those predictions and build those facets of their talk and language. And again, as we move forward, the rich context for writing, rich context for drawing and literacy. So again, we're always tuning to our practice. So as well as a good knowledge of how children learn and where each of our individual children is at, our intentional team here, teaching assistants and teachers, we're developing, always looking to develop our repertoire of strategies to support the development and crucially the language and literacy as foundation skills for our children. So again, just tuning into your practice of really thinking of, are you providing those opportunities for your children to learn words through concrete, meaningful experiences, where children can have hands-on, investigative, meaningful experiences that deepen over time, and ultimately developing their conceptual understanding, thinking about what you provide in your environment, the experience you provide, and what then we do as intentional adults to use all of those strategies to really bring it to life and develop children's thinking. So let's have a look at recommendation 2. Developing children's early reading using a broad and balanced approach. And we're particularly going to think about storytelling and shared or dialogic reading for this afternoon. So we know that books provide a powerful context for conversation, supporting oral language and in turn literacy. Dialogic or shared reading is an interactive back and forth style of reading with children. The practice promotes children's literacy and language skills. So we're going to reflect now on practice then of how we've put this into practice. So Headley in 2014 talks about dialogic reading and how it supports children to become storytellers themselves, because dialogic, what we mean is a dialogue, don't we? So it's about having a conversation when we're reading with the children. You can gradually then hand the reins over to the children. It's wonderful to see that the children then feel like the experts after multiple readings, because they feel that they can tell the story themselves, deepening discussion, and that the children really feel confident and competent to talk about the story. Some of the simple sequences that the EEF recommends is the peer here, where when adults and children are reading together, it's when adults pause and prompt the children to say something about the book, evaluating their responses. All of those strategies we use to recast the children's language back, to extend it and repeat the prompt and learn from the expansion. So the crowd then as well is thinking about some of those prompts that we can use to prompt and promote dialogue about the story. As a school, we're really tuned in to think about the dose and diet, the types of books, the book offer we have here in early years, thinking about the types of texts, where do we have those rhyming texts, storybooks, non-fiction, our traditional tale offer, some of those online texts and apps as well, thinking about the books with pictures, picture books, And really ensuring as well that we have lots of rereading familiar stories, because we know research shows that repeated reads of the same book are particularly effective for developing vocabulary. And as a school also, we tuned into texts and stories to think what makes a text challenging, to really think about all of those elements of a book, thinking about the illustrations, thinking about the text, the print referencing, which we'll look at in a little while, to really think about that those books become really engaging and children want to return to them again and again. But really thinking about what the books that we're planning for, is it intentional in our practice? So choosing a good book is really important. Like we said, is rich illustrations can carry a story. Really thinking about those characters that we all fall in love with, those villains, those all of those characters the children can really connect with. Situations in the story that promote that thinking. When something goes wrong, when there's an injustice, interesting words, ambitious words, that really develop children's vocabulary, and that we as intentional adults are really ensuring that we're seizing the opportunity to really define those words, that children have the essence of understanding those words. So we know that books are the rocket fuel for language learning, as we said, because books are fantastic for supporting vocabulary, because they contain many more rare or sophisticated words than we would have in everyday conversation. 30 in comparison to per 1,000 in everyday conversation, compared to 17 per, that's the way around. So we know that we come across lots more richer vocabulary through books than we would in everyday conversation. Without books, the vocabulary children experience will be much less rich, and it will take them much longer to develop a good vocabulary. It's much harder to learn language without the access of books. In the next activity, I'll show you that next slide is we really tuned into the books we were using with the children in our DFE early years project, to look at the sorts of vocabulary that were in the books, and also that were we maximising every opportunity to bring these to life. So tuning into unusual vocabulary, those phrases, those nouns, those adjectives, and all of those grammatical elements which help structure a narrative. So I've just got a screenshot here to show you how we did that. So we talk about adults radiating rich vocabulary with our children here. And we want to ensure that when we're reading, we are taking every opportunity to bring that vocabulary to the children, and we want the children then, we want that vocabulary to become theirs for them to use independently themselves. So the way we deliver that vocabulary is key. So words like slunk, the tiger slunk out of his den, and crouched and snarled. How can we bring those words to life? And we really tune in to think how we can use them, using lots of physical movement, tapping into resources to really bring them to life, making that language stick. And then thinking about never taking that vocabulary for granted. Of the children in the story, The Paper Dolls by Julia Donaldson, the children, it talks about they danced around the honey pot. I've never taken for granted that the children know what we mean by honey pot. And then thinking about the word grinned, what's the difference between a grin and a smile? Gnashed his teeth. So really tuning into that vocabulary and thinking how we can really bring it to life. We never skim over it or a quick read. We read for meaning, we read for language, we read for learning vocabulary to stick and stay. I mentioned earlier about print referencing. Zucker, Ward and Justice in their report talk about the importance of print referencing during shared or dialogic reading, or they call them read alouds. Print referencing can be incorporated into any read aloud, as they call it, any shared reading, whether it's fiction, non-fiction, poetry, anything at all. All of these strategies, we've got to say as well, is yes, we use them as part of our practice, part of our culture as a staff, but also we share them with parents so that children are getting this dose when they're at home as well with their parents, especially when looking at reading. Zucker, Ward and Justice suggest that print referencing can be incorporated when teachers are reading books with children with the intent of promoting literacy development, and that one read aloud per day should include at least some sort of print referencing. So really tuning into the function of the print. Justice and Ward and Zucker talk about that unless we do this, that children will not tune in, they will not engage or really understand the need for print. So really striking that balance, really, to think that are we pointing out, are we bringing that vocabulary, are we bringing that print to life? So the print function here is that if we have a speech bubble in a text, are we pointing to that speech bubble? And for example, if it's a fox, we're saying, well, these are the fox's words, he's talking. Tuning into if the author or the illustrators have used different font or different colour in the text. If it's words that are red, could we say, oh, why do you think they're red? It's because he's angry. Pointing to labels and signs in the story, pointing to different signs in the environment, for example, traffic signs, just bringing print to life in stories. And thinking about the print direction, the author's role, just tuning into it and thinking about all of those elements. Again, the central goal of print references is to engage emergent readers in conversation about print that foster metalinguistic awareness. So we said is that high quality intentional shared reading doesn't happen by chance if we're going to think about print referencing and all of these elements we want to include. Intentionally planning for dialogic reading is key. So this is a planning tool that we've used in our early years DFE project, working in partnership with the University of Oxford. So thinking about that when we're planning for shared reading is that, do we think about, first of all, is it going to be whole class read or is it going to be for a small group? What language and learning opportunities does this book offer? So thinking about the rich narrative, or is it interesting in terms of unusual words? Is there challenging words in there? Have we got different points of view that we can consider? Are there objects or pictures or resources that we need to prepare to bring some of the vocabulary and concepts to life with the children? And thinking about some of the prompts, we often refer back to the peer, to the crowd, strategies that we're going to include, and then afterwards that reflection of thinking, what will we do differently next time? When we put, going to give some of the children perhaps a pre-read, or ensure that we revisit the book with the children later on. So again, intentionally planning for shared reading. So that takes us on to our third recommendation. So let's have a look at writing. So developing children's capability and motivation to write. So we're really thinking about this afternoon about that motivation. Connecting with the characteristics of effective learning. We want children to be engaged, to really think about developing the skill, but that thrill and willingness as well in their learning in early years. So recommendation 3, language richness, irresistible context for writing. We want children, just as Billy has here, first to communicate his favourite names of his Sonic characters and some of his other Pokemon characters as well that I just can't wait to tell you about. That's what we want children to feel that they can do. So it's important to give children every opportunity to write. The EF suggests that for younger children, unstructured activities are most effective at improving early writing, and we'll share some of those strategies, those research-informed strategies that we use here at Riders Hayes. But here we've got a group of our children in our home corner who are deconstructing, cutting up our cereal boxes and our food packets and creating their shopping lists. And our practitioner here is scribing with them, and it's a modelled shared writing. So the Gateway to Writing talks about it's important if we really want to think about creating that community of writers in our early years. So by creating enduring and positive attitudes to writing, practitioners will help to develop a community of writers where all children in the class feel part of it and they can all contribute. We use what we observe about children and their interests to plan for playful and motivational writing opportunities. Children tend to be more likely to choose to engage in writing activities when they're presented in active and meaningful ways. We notice what children are excited about doing. Just here, writing Knuckles here from the Sonic film, is when we notice what children are excited to write about. Then we join children in their play and provide meaningful purposes and focus and the sustained shared thinking approaches to develop and extend children's writing. Adults intentionally model and scaffold writing with the children. Our vision is for every child to be a writer and developing that community of writers, as we said. So thinking about some of those irresistible contexts for writing is whether it be to buy something from the shop for the children, whether it's a story we write, whether it's an apology to the cleaner because we've got glitter all over the carpet again, whether it's a don't touch sign because we've created a wonderful model that we don't want to be broken, especially when it's junk modelling, we don't want that to go into the bin. Whether we want to write to our site manager or to head teacher for a new resource or something we want building or changing. The list goes on. We've got some more examples here. Here's Ria. We have our jars full of interesting objects, and the children enjoy writing what they can see inside them. Creating signs and posters. Here, some of our children have enjoyed a litter pick in our local area, and then now we've completed that litter pick, we don't want them to throw litter again, so we've made posters and signs to put up in our local area. And earlier, like we said, we enjoy having the chicks and the incubator here. But thinking about those irresistible contexts that we want to write and know what we see, and especially when the girl chick did a backflip, we had to write that. And when the black chick hatched, when all the other ones were yellow, we're just spotting those irresistible contexts where we want to engage and write about it together. One of the experience which really created a really hot spot for communication and language thinking and literacy writing was following children's fascinations about space and the moon. We showed the children a clip of the Man in the Moon, of the John Lewis advert. There are other retailers available, and the children were fascinated by the concept that there was a man in the moon. And just like the girl does on the advert and the John Lewis advert, all of the children sent a letter to the Man in the Moon. And we had a balloon launch, and all their letters and their pictures and invitations were sent away to him to the moon. And then he came to visit us. He accepted the invitation, and the Man in the Moon came to visit us at school. As you can see here, the children were bursting to communicate with him, to tell him what life was like at Riders Hayes School on an Earth, asking him questions. That's what we thought was super as well. Sometimes you find that our children need to find really irresistible context for children to ask questions, saying things, do you have a telephone on the moon? Oh, how do you do this? Where do you go for this? What happens if you do this on the moon? So lots of irresistible context for talk and developing the children's thinking, but also then for writing. So you can see now that we talk about pen pals, or where pen pals exist anymore, not anymore, but those back and forth opportunities to write to the Man in the Moon, sending pictures, sending writing, and he writes back. So thinking about those irresistible contexts for writing, but also examples of evidence-informed practice to support children's capability and motivation to write. Story scribing, we know, is a fantastic way to motivate children to want to write. It's also a great way to teach them about the process of writing well before they may be physically able to write themselves. We use story scribing as an approach in our early years, when staff, particularly thinking about our preschool and our 2-year-old vision, when we feel it's appropriate, but also planning for it, when we offer to scribe a story or a narrative for the children. Quite often it might just be a drawing that's initial stimulus for a story that sparks imagination. As the child speaks, the adult writes, and it's important for the child to watch the adult in that process and for the adult to write exactly what the child says. In that way, even the youngest children learn that spoken words are transferred onto paper in our journey to develop this culture of writing in the classrooms, community of writers. They also see how writing's formed and what it looks like, thinking about the early learning goal of a transcription and composition of writing. So it's a really good starting point. So starting with our 2-year-olds and continues through nursery and reception. So thinking about the role of the adult is key. The fundamental, crucial, deliberate adult is later in reception. The adults will offer the child the pen, and that initially, just as one of our children is here, they might just write one of the first few initial sounds. So here she's labelling a picture with the s sound for seed. But also then, as children move forward and build their segmenting skills and phonological awareness and development, is they start to write words and sentences. So it becomes a shared writing process. Story Scribe is a fantastic way to motivate children to write. It's also a great way to teach them about the process of writing. And at the end of a story scribing session, it's that opportunity to share, to celebrate, so children can share too, and it motivates other children to want to write too. Another strategy that we use here at Rose Hayes is draw, talk, write and share. It's another research-based approach, and it's a result of an Australian research conducted by Mackenzie between 2010 and 2019. And the findings from this research show that when drawing is valued and given priority as a meaning-making system for children, particularly in the first 6 months, those first 2 terms of school, the written text created when they write are longer and more complex than when conventional writing is introduced without the support of drawing and talking. So the draw, talk, write and share strategy is an individual writing strategy. However, we find it really effective as a whole class focus as well as small groups. So again, thinking about those opportunities, we really value children's drawing. And interestingly, one of the parents, was talking to me on the playground and saying, oh, well, let them draw a picture after they've finished their writing. But actually, it's turning that round and thinking, actually, let's start and embrace the drawing. And then that gives us a reason to write. So the process, here's 2 of our super practitioners doing modelling some of their drawing and talking and writing and annotating it too. So adults think out loud in their modelling, drawing and writing. All of those metacognitive strategies, there's plan, do, review, focusing on the shapes, directionality of their lines, if they need to use a ruler, if they need to use the tools to support them. We explicitly talk about pencil grip too. We narrate what we're drawing, we narrate what we're talking, we include the children as well, obviously, so it's sustained, it's back and forth, we're talking with, not to the children. So we construct, children may come up and help and support, so I'll go and draw that for you. Is that starting points often though are a book. We deliberately choose pages, illustrations for a book that have got the detail in there. Thinking as well that if we're thinking about print referencing, we may choose books that have speech bubbles in them. So that gives us an opportunity to think about text and writing in that form. We may have a short clip. In reception recently, we were looking at buildings and houses and homes. So we looked at a short clip from the Pixar film Up to inform our draw, talk and write. So when selecting books and illustrations, it's the detail and really thinking about how irresistible that would be. And as we said, children then start to add writing to their drawing here. So just showing you that progression. So we've got here a drawing of the castle at the top of the beanstalk, to the children then writing their own stories of once upon a time, Jack and his mummy did not have any money. So Jack took the cow to the market. An old man gave Jack some magic beans. So when the research from Reggio Emilia talks about the importance of how drawing is in communicating the thinking of young children who have not yet developed an adequate vocabulary to convey the information. So really thinking about it with our youngest children, perhaps our reluctant EAL children, to give them the opportunity to tell their story, to tell their version of events through drawing. And also we know that drawing supports children in recognising the detail in the world around them. So at the moment in reception, the children are enjoying growing, and in nursery too, they're enjoying growing and planting, and all of the language and thinking that has developed from children really tuning in and drawing root systems, of drawing flowers and plants, to really tune in to the detail of all of those different concepts. And finally then, another strategy that we implement is Tales Toolkit. A toolkit for creating tales by Greg Bottrell in 2020. So it's a resource that children find really accessible. Every child feels like an author, that they can write and tell their own stories. The symbols, really simple, recognisable symbols for a character, a setting, a problem and solution. We incorporate it into Draw, Talk and Share as well. So some children are drawing the character, drawing the setting, drawing the problem of what goes wrong and the solution, but then writing too, or story scribing of that shared writing process. So the children's stories are created using anything from a picture to start off with, a character, or an object as well. We use resources, so it might be someone familiar to them, it might be their mum, we might have the main character be a character that could be one of the children in our class. But once children become confident storytellers as well, they start to add resources, they start to act out their stories as well. So being symbol based, all children really understand and remember the story structure, even those children who aren't reading yet or aren't yet speaking English. Research carried out by the Unit of School and Family Studies at Goldsmiths University in London found that the Tales Toolkit showed increased levels of literacy, communication and language, creativity and improved social and emotional skills, typically around 3 months ahead of peers in classes not using this approach. So, and particularly for us, Tales Toolkit and all of these strategies I've spoke about tonight have been a super springboard for children, particularly reluctant children, on returning after COVID. So part of our recovery curriculum, we found that these strategies, these evidence-informed strategies from writing, are motivating children to want to write, are giving them that scaffold, that confidence to want to write again, and particularly some of those children we know haven't held a pencil for such a long time, or a pen or a tool for writing, that this is really giving them that motivation and confidence to want to write. So thank you, as one of the children's written here, thank you for listening, and along with the slides I can send them to Carl and Asima, some of the audits which you may find useful in your as you tune into your practice in your schools and settings. Thank you very much for listening, and here are the references for you if you'd like to find out some more information. Thank you very much. Thank you. And our next session is on Wednesday the 31st of March, where we'll be starting with the evidence improving early maths, and that will be delivered by Alice Francis, Anne Hopkins and Jill Delvin. Thank you.
Victoria, thank you very much for that, for giving us your time, sharing your knowledge of the research, the pedagogy, and those lovely examples of it applied in practice as well. I think that's great for colleagues to see. Okay. I think one of the privileges of us as a
research goal is getting to work with colleagues such as yourself. So we really do appreciate that time.
Thank you for inviting me.
We've got another session next week, Improving Early Mathematics, where we have our research associates from the Elliott Foundation sharing their experiences and evidence improved practice. And following that session next week, we'll also be sharing with you our early years professional development programme for September 2021 too. So once again, Victoria, thank you very much, and thank you for everybody for giving your time this evening, and we look forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you.
Thank you very much.